The sun set over Dodge City, Kansas, casting its dying light across the dusty streets as Charlotte Dawson stuffed her dreams into a worn leather satchel, along with the rejection letter that had arrived with the morning mail coach. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper with its harsh words. "Female physicians are not what this territory needs. Your application is denied." It was 1878, and at 22, Charlotte had spent the last 4 years trying to become a doctor against all odds. Her father's medical books, smuggled from his study and read by candlelight, had taught her more than most medical students learned in their first years of training. Her quiet apprenticeship with Doc Miller before his death last winter had given her practical experience that surpassed theory. But none of that mattered to the medical schools back east that refused to even consider her application, or to the townspeople who laughed at the notion of a woman. Dr. Charlotte wiped a tear from her cheek as she tucked the last of her medical journals away. The boarding house room she'd called home for the past year felt suffocating now. Mrs. Patterson's words from breakfast still rang in her ears. "It's time you gave up this foolishness and found yourself a husband, dear. That's what women are meant for, not cutting people open and mixing medicines." A knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, hastily composing herself. The door creaked open to reveal Agnes, the boarding housemaid. "Miss Charlotte, there's a gentleman downstairs asking for you. Says his name is Griffin Galloway." Charlotte frowned. She knew most everyone in Dodge City, but that name wasn't familiar. "Did he say what he wanted?" Agnes shook her head. "Just that it's urgent, something about Doc Miller's old practice." Charlotte's heart skipped. Doc Miller's practice had been closed since his death, his instruments and medicines gathering dust in the small building at the edge of town. She smoothed her skirt and followed Agnes downstairs. In the parlor stood a man Charlotte had never seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days in the saddle. His dark hair was cut short but still managed to curl slightly at the edges of his hat, which he held respectfully in his hands. A gun belt hung at his hip, but there was nothing threatening in his stance. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that suggested he came from somewhere farther south. "Yes," Charlotte replied cautiously. "I'm told you wanted to see me about Doc Miller's practice." Griffin Galloway nodded, his green eyes studying her with interest. "I purchased the building last week. Town marshal mentioned you were Doc's apprentice before he passed." Charlotte stiffened. "I was. Is someone ill? I still have some medical knowledge, though I'm not." "My horse threw a shoe outside town," Griffin interrupted. "I took a fall and got this." He held up his arm, pulling back his sleeve to reveal a deep gash along his forearm, hastily wrapped in a bandana now soaked with blood. Charlotte moved forward instantly, her medical training overtaking her caution. "You need that cleaned and stitched before infection sets in. Come with me to the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson keeps a clean workspace." She led him through to the back of the house, grateful that the boarding house matron was out visiting her sister. Charlotte gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and the small medical kit she carried everywhere. "This will hurt," she warned as she began cleaning the wound. Griffin didn't flinch. "Had worse." "What brings you to Dodge City, Mr. Galloway?" Charlotte asked, partly to distract him as she examined the wound, partly out of genuine curiosity. "Looking to settle down. Open a horse ranch outside town." He watched her work with curious eyes. "You handle that needle like you were born to it." Charlotte's movements faltered slightly. "I wanted to be a doctor. I've studied for years." "So why aren't you one?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She focused on making the next stitch perfect before answering. "Because I'm a woman, Mr. Galloway. Medical schools won't accept me. Patients wouldn't trust me in this town." She sighed. This town thinks I should be focused on finding a husband, not saving lives." Griffin was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "So you're giving up?" The word stung. "I'm being realistic," Charlotte replied, knotting the thread and cutting it cleanly. "Everyone from my father to the town council has told me it's impossible." "Seems to me," Griffin said, examining her handiwork with an appreciative eye, "that you just stitched my arm better than the army surgeon who patched me up after Antietam." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You fought in the war," Griffin nodded. "Enlisted at 17, saw things no boy should see. Also saw a woman doctor save my best friend's life when the male physicians had given up." He met her gaze steadily. "Her name was Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, only woman to ever receive the Medal of Honor." "I've read about her," Charlotte whispered, hope fluttering in her chest for the first time in months. "Then you know it's possible." Griffin stood, towering over her. "I bought Doc Miller's practice because this town needs a physician. I'm looking to hire one to serve my ranch hands and the surrounding farms." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I was going to post this to medical schools back east, but I'm thinking the right doctor might already be here." Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "The town would never. The town doesn't have to know at first," Griffin interrupted. "You'd be employed by me, treating my ranch hands, building your reputation one patient at a time." His eyes held a challenge. "Unless you've truly given up on your dream." "Everyone says I should," Charlotte said softly, bandaging his arm with careful hands. Griffin caught her wrist gently when she finished. "I don't know you, Miss Dawson, but I know talent when I see it. I'll believe in you until you can believe in yourself again." Charlotte looked up into his eyes, searching for any sign of mockery or deceit, but found only sincerity. Something tightened in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked. Griffin's smile was warm and genuine. "Because I've seen what happens when people give up on their dreams. It hollows them out." He released her wrist. "And because I've got 20 ranch hands arriving next week who are going to need someone who can stitch a wound as neat as this one." Charlotte felt as though she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safe, conventional path every woman was expected to follow. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenge, and the chance, however small, to become what she'd always dreamed of being. "I'll need supplies," she said finally, "and access to newer medical journals." Griffin's smile broadened. "I'll have them ordered from Chicago. Can you be ready to move out to the ranch by week's end?" Charlotte nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Yes." "Then we have a deal, Dr. Dawson." He extended his hand. Charlotte shook it, feeling the calluses of a working man against her palm. "I'm not a doctor yet, Mr. Galloway." "You will be," he replied with a certainty that made her believe it might actually be possible. "I'll return on Friday with a wagon for your things." After he left, Charlotte stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the medical kit in her hands. For the first time in months, her dreams didn't feel like a burden. They felt like wings. Friday came faster than Charlotte expected. She'd spent the week in a flurry of preparations, packing her medical books and the few instruments she owned, saying goodbye to the handful of friends she'd made in town. Mrs. Patterson had been scandalized by her decision to move to Griffin Galloway's ranch. "It's completely improper for an unmarried woman to live among so many men," the older woman had scolded. "You'll ruin your reputation." "I'm going as a physician, not as," Charlotte had begun, only to be cut off. "You're no physician, girl. You're just a woman with ideas above her station." Mrs. Patterson's face had softened then. "Charlotte, dear, I say this because I care for you. This dream of yours will only bring you heartache. Give it up and find a nice man to marry." Charlotte had smiled sadly. "I've found someone who believes in me, Mrs. Patterson." That's worth more than you can imagine. Now, as she stood on the boarding house porch with her trunks and satchels beside her, Charlotte wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. What if Griffin Galloway wasn't the honorable man he seemed? What if this was all some elaborate trick? Her doubts were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Griffin rode into view atop a magnificent black stallion, leading a wagon driven by an older man with silver hair and a weathered face. "Morning, Miss Dawson," Griffin called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "This is Hank Simmons, my ranch foreman. Thought you might feel more comfortable with a chaperone on the ride out." The consideration touched Charlotte. "Thank you, Mr. Galloway." "Griffin," he corrected with a smile. "If we're going to be working together, formality seems unnecessary." "Charlotte, then," she replied, returning his smile. Griffin loaded her trunks into the wagon with Hank's help, then offered Charlotte his hand to assist her onto the wagon seat. His touch was warm and steady, just like the green eyes that met hers. "Ready for a new beginning?" he asked quietly. Charlotte nodded. "Ready." The journey to Griffin's ranch took nearly 2 hours. As they traveled, Charlotte learned that Griffin had purchased 5,000 acres of prime grazing land just north of Dodge City. He'd spent the last 2 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, saving every penny to buy his own spread. "The war took everything my family had," he explained as they rode. "When I came home to Georgia, there was nothing left, so I headed west to start over." "That must have been difficult," Charlotte said, thinking of her own comfortable upbringing in St. Louis before her parents' deaths had left her to make her own way. Griffin shrugged. "Life rarely gives you what you expect. It's what you do with what you're given that matters." He glanced at her. "Like you using your medical knowledge to help others, even when doors were closed to you." Charlotte felt herself blushing under his admiring gaze. "I haven't done much yet." "You will," Griffin said with that same unwavering confidence. When they crested a small rise, Charlotte gasped. Below them stretched a valley with a creek running through it, green with spring grass. A large 2-story farmhouse stood near the creek, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Men were working on fencing in the distance, while a herd of horses grazed in a corral near the barn. "Welcome to Galloway Ranch," Griffin said, pride evident in his voice. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed. "It's a work in progress," he replied, "but it's home." As they drove into the yard, Charlotte noticed a small building set apart from the others, freshly painted white with green shutters. "That's Doc Miller's old place," Griffin explained, following her gaze. "Had it moved out here last week. Thought it would make a good clinic for you." Charlotte stared at him in astonishment. "You moved an entire building," Griffin grinned. "Took 8 horses and a lot of cursing, but yes. Wanted you to have a proper place to work." The care and thought he'd put into preparing for her arrival touched Charlotte deeply. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a chance to truly practice medicine. Griffin showed her to a comfortable bedroom in the main house, explaining that his housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, lived in the adjoining room and would keep the men's wagging tongues at bay. The older woman greeted Charlotte warmly, assuring her that her reputation would be well protected. "Besides," Mrs. Abernathy added with a twinkle in her eye, "a lady doctor is just what this place needs. These cowboys are always getting themselves cut up or thrown from horses." After getting settled, Griffin took Charlotte to the clinic. Inside, she found Doc Miller's examination table, cabinets, and even his desk, all arranged much as they had been in town. But there were additions: 2 new medical instruments still in their packaging, fresh linens, and an entire shelf of medical journals and textbooks. "How did you?" Charlotte began, running her fingers over the pristine cover of Gray's Anatomy. "Telegraphed a medical supply house in Chicago the day we met," Griffin explained. Asked for everything a starting physician might need. This must have cost a fortune, Charlotte whispered. Overwhelmed by his generosity, Griffin shrugged. Consider it an investment in the health of my ranch hands. He hesitated, then added more softly, and in your dream. Charlotte turned to face him, unable to find words adequate to express her gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. Just be the doctor I know you can be, Griffin replied. That's all the thanks I need. That evening, Charlotte joined Griffin, Hank, and Mrs. Abernathy for dinner in the ranch house. The conversation flowed easily, and Charlotte found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something about Griffin Galloway that made her feel at ease, despite the dramatic change in her circumstances. After dinner, Griffin invited her to sit on the porch. The spring evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Griffin spoke. First day in a new place is always the hardest, he said. How are you feeling? Charlotte considered the question. Nervous, excited, terrified I'll fail. That's how I felt when I bought this place, Griffin admitted. Still do some mornings. He looked out over his land. But then I remember that failing isn't the worst thing that can happen. What is? Charlotte asked. Never trying at all. His gaze returned to her face. Never finding out what you're capable of, Charlotte nodded, understanding completely. Thank you for giving me this chance, Griffin. No one else would have. Their loss, he said simply. Get some rest, Charlotte. Tomorrow, you start becoming the doctor you were meant to be. Charlotte's first week at Galloway Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Her first patient arrived the very next morning, a young ranch hand named Eddie who'd sliced his palm open while mending a fence. Charlotte cleaned, stitched, and bandaged the wound with confident hands, instructing Eddie on how to keep it clean and when to return to have the stitches removed. Word spread quickly among the ranch hands that Miss Charlotte knew her medicine. By the end of the week, she'd treated sprains, cuts, a broken finger, and a nasty case of poison ivy. Each successful treatment boosted her confidence and reinforced her belief that she'd made the right decision in coming to the ranch. Griffin observed her work from a respectful distance, never interfering but always available if she needed anything. Charlotte often caught him watching her with a look of quiet pride that warmed her more than it should have. On Saturday evening, as Charlotte was organizing her supplies after treating a ranch hand's sprained ankle, Griffin appeared at the clinic door with a bouquet of wildflowers. For your desk, he explained, handing them to her. Thought they might brighten the place up. They're lovely, Charlotte said, inhaling their sweet fragrance. Thank you. Griffin leaned against the doorframe, watching as she arranged the flowers in a jar. How do you feel about your first week as Galloway Ranch's doctor? Charlotte smiled. Better than I expected. Your men have been respectful and grateful. It's more than I hoped for. They know quality care when they receive it, Griffin replied. And speaking of care, I was wondering if you'd join me for a ride tomorrow after church. There are some tenant farmers on the far side of the property who could use medical attention but can't make it into town easily. I'd be happy to, Charlotte said, pleased at the opportunity to expand her practice. Will we be gone long? Most of the day, Griffin confirmed. We'll need to visit 3 homesteads. Mrs. Abernathy is packing us a lunch. The next day, after attending the small church in town, where Charlotte endured curious stares and whispers from the Dodge City residents who recognized her, Griffin and Charlotte set out on horseback. Charlotte wore a split riding skirt that allowed her to ride astride, with her medical bag secured to her saddle. You sit a horse well, Griffin commented as they rode side by side across the rolling grassland. My father taught me when I was young, Charlotte explained. He said every proper lady should know how to ride. though I doubt he meant for me to be galloping across the prairie to treat patients." Griffin chuckled. "I think he'd be proud of you." The first homestead they visited belonged to the Jorgensen family, Norwegian immigrants who'd settled on Griffin's land 2 years earlier. Mrs. Jorgensen greeted them warmly, ushering them into her immaculate cabin where her husband lay on a bed, his leg propped up. "Broke it falling from roof," Mrs. Jorgensen explained in halting English. "3 weeks ago. Not healing right." Charlotte examined the leg carefully, noting the improper alignment of the bone. "It wasn't set correctly," she told Griffin quietly. "It needs to be rebroken and reset, or he'll have a permanent limp." Griffin nodded grimly. "Can you do it?" Charlotte took a deep breath. "Yes, but it will be painful for him." She explained the situation to the Jorgensens, who agreed to the procedure after Griffin assured them there would be no charge. What followed was the most challenging medical procedure Charlotte had yet attempted. With Griffin and Mr. Jorgensen's teenage son holding the man down, Charlotte carefully rebroken the partially healed bone and realigned it properly. Mr. Jorgensen's screams were heart-wrenching, but he thanked her through gritted teeth when it was over. After splinting the leg properly and leaving Mrs. Jorgensen with instructions and pain medication, Charlotte and Griffin continued to the other homesteads. By the time they started back to the ranch, Charlotte had treated a child with a persistent cough, lanced an infected wound, and delivered medicine to an elderly man with heart trouble. As the sun began to set, Griffin suggested they stop by a small pond on the property to rest before completing the journey home. The water reflected the golden light of the setting sun as they sat on a fallen log, sharing the remainder of Mrs. Abernathy's packed lunch. "You did good work today," Griffin said, passing Charlotte a canteen of water. Charlotte took a long drink before answering. "It felt right, like I was doing exactly what I was meant to do." "Because you were," Griffin replied simply. Charlotte studied him in the fading light. "Why do you believe in me so much? You barely know me." Griffin was quiet for a moment, watching a pair of ducks land on the pond's surface. "During the war, I saw men give up, not just die, but give up living before death took them. And I saw others fight against impossible odds and survive because someone, a comrade, a nurse, a doctor, believed they could." He turned to look at her. "The human spirit needs belief like a plant needs sun. Sometimes we can provide our own, and sometimes we need to borrow it from others until our own faith grows strong again." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes at the simple wisdom of his words. "You're a remarkable man, Griffin Galloway." Griffin smiled, a hint of self-consciousness crossing his face. Just a man who recognizes something special when he sees it. He stood, offering her his hand. "We should head back before dark." As they mounted their horses, Charlotte realized something had shifted between them during this long day together. Something warm and fragile and full of possibility. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Charlotte treated the ranch hands and tenant farmers during the day and studied her medical books in the evenings. Twice a week, Griffin joined her after dinner, asking questions about her studies or simply sitting companionably as she read. Word of the lady doctor at Galloway Ranch began to spread beyond Griffin's property. First came the wives of neighboring ranchers, hesitantly asking if Charlotte might examine their children. Then came cowboys from other spreads, sheepishly requesting treatment for injuries they'd sustained. Griffin encouraged these visits, even setting up a proper waiting area in front of the clinic. "The more people who see what you can do, the harder it will be for anyone to deny your skill," he explained. Charlotte's confidence grew with each patient she treated successfully. She began keeping detailed case notes, applying the scientific method she'd read about in her journals, and writing to medical supply houses for specific medications and instruments. One evening in late June, Griffin knocked on her clinic door as she was finishing her notes for the day. "Have a moment?" he asked, a strange tension in his voice. "Of course," Charlotte replied, setting aside her pen. "Is something wrong?" Griffin entered, removing his hat. "Got word that Dr. Henderson in town is leaving. His wife's illness is worse, and they're moving back east to be near her family." Charlotte's heart skipped. "So Dodge City will have no doctor?" Griffin nodded. "The town council's holding a meeting tomorrow to discuss bringing in a new physician." He hesitated. "I think you should attend." Charlotte stared at him. "They'd never consider me." "Maybe not at first," Griffin agreed, "but things have changed in the past 2 months. Half the town has either been treated by you or knows someone who has. And the other half still thinks women should stick to birthing babies and tending sick children," Charlotte said bitterly. Griffin stepped closer. "Charlotte, you've proven yourself over and over. You've treated gunshot wounds, set broken bones, diagnosed illnesses that puzzled other doctors. You've earned the right to be considered." Charlotte shook her head. "They'll laugh me out of the meeting." "Not if I'm with you," Griffin said firmly. "Not if the largest landowner in the county stands up and testifies to your skill." Charlotte looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Griffin's expression softened. "Because I've watched you come alive these past weeks, doing what you love. Because you deserve the chance to be recognized for your talents." He took her hand gently. "And because I care about you, Charlotte, more than I should, perhaps." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Charlotte felt her cheeks flush. "I care about you too," she whispered. Griffin's thumb traced small circles on her palm. "Then let me help you fight for your dream. Come to the meeting tomorrow." Charlotte took a deep breath. "All right, but don't be surprised if we're both run out of town on a rail." Griffin grinned. "I've faced worse odds." The town council meeting the next day was held in Dodge City's largest saloon, the only building with enough space to accommodate the crowd that gathered. Charlotte sat beside Griffin near the front, acutely aware of the stares and whispers directed their way. Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order, explaining the situation with Dr. Henderson and emphasizing the urgent need for a new physician. "We've telegraphed medical schools in St. Louis and Chicago," the mayor announced. "But it could take months to get a doctor out here, and Dodge City can't go that long without medical care." "What about that Army surgeon who passed through last month?" someone called out. "Could we send for him?" "He's headed to California," the mayor replied. "And he made it clear he's not interested in settling in Kansas." Griffin stood then, his tall frame commanding attention. "Mr. Mayor, council members, citizens of Dodge City, I believe there's a solution to our problem right here." He gestured to Charlotte. "Miss Dawson has been serving as physician to Galloway Ranch and the surrounding homesteads for the past 2 months. She's treated everything from broken bones to gunshot wounds, and every patient has received exemplary care." A murmur ran through the crowd. Charlotte felt dozens of eyes turn to her. "Now see here, Galloway," Councilman Pratt interrupted, his face flushed. "Miss Dawson isn't a proper doctor. She has no medical degree, no formal training." "Neither did Doc Miller when he first came west," Griffin countered. "He learned through apprenticeship and practical experience, just as Miss Dawson has done. And I'd wager she's read more medical journals and textbooks than half the doctors practicing today." "But she's a woman," someone shouted from the back. "Yes, she is," Griffin agreed, his voice level. "And that hasn't stopped her from saving lives." He turned to the crowd. "How many of you have been treated by Miss Dawson, or know someone who has?" Slowly, hands began to rise throughout the room. Charlotte was stunned to see how many people acknowledged her care. "Tom Jenkins," Griffin called to a rancher near the back. "Tell them about your boy's fever." Jenkins stood awkwardly. "My son took sick 2 weeks back, burning up, delirious. Miss Dawson diagnosed typhoid and treated him day and night for 3 days. Doc Henderson had given up on him, but Miss Dawson saved his life." Others began to speak up then, the blacksmith whose crushed hand Charlotte had saved from amputation. A woman whose difficult delivery Charlotte had managed when the midwife was at another birth. A cowboy whose bullet wound Charlotte had cleaned and stitched without flinching. Mayor Wilson raised his hands for quiet. "This is all very touching, but the fact remains that Miss Dawson doesn't have the proper credentials to serve as town physician." Charlotte rose then, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "You're right, Mayor Wilson. I don't have a medical degree because medical schools won't accept women, but I have knowledge, experience, and a willingness to learn more." She looked around the room. "I don't ask to be named town physician permanently. Consider it a temporary arrangement while you search for a male doctor if you must, but I can serve this community well in the meantime." The mayor frowned, clearly conflicted. "The council will need to discuss this privately." "While you discuss," Griffin said, "consider this. Dodge City can have a skilled physician now, one who's already proven herself to many of your citizens, or you can wait months for an unknown doctor who might not stay once he sees what frontier medicine really entails." He looked around the room. "Miss Dawson has already shown her commitment to this community. Can you afford to turn her away because she wears skirts instead of trousers?" The council withdrew to deliberate, leaving Charlotte and Griffin to wait with the rest of the townspeople. Charlotte's hands trembled slightly. "Thank you for speaking for me," she whispered to Griffin. He squeezed her hand briefly. "I only said what needed saying. The rest was all you." When the council returned, Mayor Wilson looked solemn. "After consideration, the council has decided to appoint Miss Charlotte Dawson as interim physician for Dodge City for a probationary period of 3 months. At that time, her position will be re-evaluated." A cheer went up from several of Charlotte's patients, while others muttered disapprovingly. Charlotte barely heard any of it, overwhelmed by the realization that her dream, the one everyone had told her to abandon, was actually coming true. Griffin leaned close. "Congratulations, Dr. Dawson." The next day, Charlotte moved her few belongings into the rooms above Dr. Henderson's former office in Dodge City. Griffin had insisted on purchasing the practice outright and renting it to Charlotte for a nominal fee, until you're established enough to buy it yourself. "I can't let you do this," Charlotte protested as Griffin carried her medical books up the narrow staircase. "You're not letting me do anything," Griffin replied cheerfully. "I'm making a sound business investment in the town's new doctor." Charlotte's first weeks as Dodge City's physician were challenging. Some townspeople refused to consult a female doctor, traveling miles to the next town for medical care. Others came grudgingly, making it clear they were only there because they had no choice. But many came willingly, especially those who'd already experienced Charlotte's care at Galloway Ranch. Women in particular sought her out, comfortable discussing intimate health concerns with her in a way they never had with Dr. Henderson. Griffin visited often, sometimes bringing supplies from his trips to Wichita or Topeka, sometimes just stopping by to see how she was faring. Their relationship had deepened over the summer months, evolving into something neither of them had put a name to yet. One evening in August, Griffin invited Charlotte to dinner at the Grand Hotel, Dodge City's finest establishment. When she arrived, wearing her best dress of deep blue silk, she found Griffin waiting in the lobby, more formally dressed than she'd ever seen him. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes warming as he took in her appearance. "Thank you," Charlotte replied, suddenly shy. "You look quite handsome yourself." Griffin offered his arm and led her into the hotel dining room, where they were seated at a table in a quiet corner. After they'd ordered, Griffin seemed uncharacteristically nervous, turning his water glass in circles on the tablecloth. "Is everything all right?" Charlotte asked. Griffin looked up, a half-smile on his face. "Yes, no, I'm not sure." He took a deep breath. "Charlotte, there's something I need to tell you." Charlotte's heart sank. In her experience, those words rarely preceded good news. "What is it?" "I've been offered a contract to supply horses to the army," Griffin said. "It would mean significant income for the ranch, but—" He hesitated. "It would also mean traveling to Fort Leavenworth next month to finalize the arrangements." "That's wonderful news," Charlotte said, relieved it wasn't something worse. "How long would you be gone?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Griffin reached across the table to take her hand. "I don't like the thought of leaving you alone for so long." Charlotte smiled at his concern. "I'm hardly alone in Dodge City, and I'm quite capable of looking after myself." "I know you are," Griffin replied. "That's one of the many things I admire about you." His expression grew more serious. "In fact, there are a great many things I admire about you, Charlotte Dawson." The intensity of his gaze made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "Griffin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I never expected to find someone like you when I came to Kansas. I never expected to feel this way again after the war took so much from me." His thumb caressed her knuckles gently. "I'm saying that I love you, Charlotte. I think I have since the day you stitched up my arm and told me about your dream of becoming a doctor." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. For months, she'd been trying to suppress her growing feelings for Griffin, convinced that pursuing her medical career meant setting aside any hopes of love or family. "You don't have to say anything now," Griffin continued, misinterpreting her silence. "I know your career is your priority, as it should be. I just wanted you to know how I feel before I leave." "Griffin," Charlotte said softly, turning her hand to clasp his. "My career is important to me. It's the dream I've fought for all my life. But these past months have taught me that dreams can grow and change." She met his eyes steadily. "I love you too. I think I have for some time." The smile that spread across Griffin's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Then I have one more question for you, Charlotte Dawson." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Will you marry me? Not right away if you're not ready, but someday, when the time is right for both of us." Charlotte stared at the simple gold ring with its small, perfect diamond. "You want to marry me?" "Even knowing that I intend to continue practicing medicine." "I want to marry you because you practice medicine," Griffin replied. "Because you fought for your dream even when everyone told you to give up. Because you care for others with your whole heart." He squeezed her hand. "I don't want you to give up any part of yourself, Charlotte. I want to stand beside you and support you as you become everything you're meant to be." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Griffin Galloway." Griffin slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You've made me the happiest man in Kansas." Charlotte laughed through her tears. "And you've proven that a woman doesn't have to choose between her dreams and love." Their wedding took place that October, after Griffin returned from Fort Leavenworth with the Army contract secured. They married in the small church outside Dodge City, with Hank Simmons standing up for Griffin, and, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Patterson serving as Charlotte's matron of honor. The Stern boarding house owner had finally come around to supporting Charlotte's medical practice, after Charlotte had successfully treated her for a dangerous case of pneumonia. The townspeople turned out in force, many bringing gifts to show their appreciation for their lady doctor, who had proven herself a dozen times over during her probationary period. The town council had unanimously voted to make her position permanent, with Mayor Wilson himself declaring that Dodge City was privileged to have a physician of Dr. Dawson's caliber. Charlotte wore a cream-colored dress with a lace collar and carried a bouquet of autumn wildflowers gathered from the prairie around Galloway Ranch. When Griffin saw her walking down the aisle toward him, the love and pride in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman on earth. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and support one another through all of life's challenges. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Griffin kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Charlotte's eyes. "Hello, Doctor Galloway," he whispered as they broke apart, a smile playing at his lips. "I think I'll keep Dawson professionally," Charlotte whispered back. "I've just gotten people used to the idea of Dr. Dawson." Griffin laughed. "Whatever you wish, my love. As long as you're my wife, I don't care what name you practice under." The reception was held at Galloway Ranch, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns hanging from the branches. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and more laughter than Charlotte could remember hearing in one place. As evening fell, Griffin led her away from the celebrations to the porch of the ranch house. From there, they could see the lights of the party but have a moment of privacy. "Happy?" Griffin asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Completely," Charlotte replied, leaning back against his chest. "I never imagined this was possible, having both my career and a husband who supports me in it." Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. A wedding gift. Charlotte unwrapped it carefully to reveal a brass nameplate, beautifully engraved. "Dr. Charlotte Dawson Galloway. For your office door," Griffin explained. "So everyone knows exactly who you are, the finest doctor in Kansas and my beloved wife." Charlotte turned in his arms, overcome with emotion. "It's perfect. Thank you." She reached up to touch his face. "Not just for this, but for believing in me when no one else would. For giving me the courage to keep fighting." Griffin caught her hand and kissed her palm. "You always had the courage, Charlotte. You just needed someone to remind you of it." "I love you," Charlotte whispered. "And I love you," Griffin replied, drawing her closer. "Now and always." Over the next year, Charlotte's medical practice flourished. She gained a reputation that extended beyond Dodge City, with patients sometimes traveling from neighboring towns to consult her. She continued to study and learn, subscribing to medical journals and corresponding with physicians back east. Griffin's horse ranch prospered as well. The Army contract provided stability, while his skill in breeding and training quality horses brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. They divided their time between the ranch and Charlotte's home above the medical office in town, creating a life that balanced both their dreams. In the spring of 1880, Charlotte made a discovery that both thrilled and terrified her. She was expecting a child. She broke the news to Griffin on a Sunday afternoon as they walked along the creek that ran through their property. "Are you certain?" Griffin asked, his face alight with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. Charlotte nodded. "About 3 months along. The baby should arrive in late October." Griffin swept her into a careful embrace. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child." "I'm a bit scared," Charlotte admitted. "Being a doctor and a mother, I'm not sure how to balance both." Griffin drew back to look at her. "We'll figure it out together, just as we've figured everything else out. And I'll be right beside you every step of the way." As her pregnancy progressed, Charlotte continued to practice medicine, though she began training a nurse to assist with more strenuous cases. The people of Dodge City, now fully accepting of their female physician, were protective and supportive of her condition, often insisting she sit while treating them or bringing food to ensure she was eating properly. On October 25, 1880, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor attended by a midwife and Griffin, who refused to leave her side despite tradition, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy son whom they named James Miller Galloway, in honor of the doctor who had first encouraged Charlotte's medical aspirations. Motherhood brought new challenges and joys, but true to his word, Griffin supported Charlotte in maintaining her medical practice. They hired a nanny to help care for James when Charlotte was seeing patients, and Griffin often brought the baby to her office between feedings, proudly showing off their son to whoever happened to be in the waiting room. By the time James was walking, Charlotte had established a training program for nurses, teaching local women basic medical skills to assist her and provide care when she wasn't available. Several showed particular promise, and Charlotte began to dream of someday opening a small nursing school in Dodge City. In the spring of 1882, Charlotte received a letter that changed everything. It was from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, responding to an inquiry she'd sent months earlier. "They've invited me to come study for a term," Charlotte told Griffin that evening, her voice trembling with excitement. "Not as a full student, I'd need more preparation for that, but as a visiting practitioner. They want to hear about my experiences as a frontier physician." Griffin beamed with pride. "That's wonderful news. When would you go?" Charlotte hesitated. "That's the difficult part." "It would mean leaving for 3 months this summer." She looked at their son, now playing contentedly on the floor. "I can't bear the thought of being away from you both for so long, but this opportunity is too important to pass up," Griffin finished for her. He took her hands in his. "Charlotte, remember what I told you the day we met. I believe in your dream. That hasn't changed," he smiled. "James and I will manage for 3 months and we'll be right here waiting when you return." "You're certain?" Charlotte asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Absolutely," Griffin assured her. "Besides, think of what this could mean for your career, for other women who dream of becoming doctors. You could help pave the way." Charlotte embraced him, overwhelmed by his unwavering support. "I don't deserve you, Griffin Galloway." "On the contrary," Griffin replied, holding her close. "We deserve each other, two dreamers who refuse to give up." Charlotte's time at the Women's Medical College was transformative. She absorbed new medical techniques, participated in surgeries more complex than any she'd performed in Dodge City, and formed connections with female physicians from across the country. She wrote to Griffin daily, pouring out her experiences and her longing for him and James. When she returned to Kansas that fall, she brought with her not only new medical knowledge, but also an invitation to return the following year to complete studies that would formally qualify her as a physician. It would mean another, longer separation from her family, but Griffin never wavered in his support. "We'll make it work," he promised. "Your dream matters too much to compromise now." In September 1883, Charlotte Dawson Galloway officially became doctor. Charlotte Dawson Galloway, with a medical degree from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. When she returned to Dodge City, the entire town turned out to welcome her home, with Mayor Wilson declaring a holiday in her honor. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching 3-year-old James chase fireflies across the yard, Griffin handed Charlotte a small package. "One more gift to mark the occasion," he said. Inside, Charlotte found a beautifully bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "For your medical observations," Griffin explained. "I thought perhaps someday you might write a book about frontier medicine. Share your knowledge with others who might follow in your footsteps." Charlotte touched the journal reverently. "It's perfect." She looked up at her husband, the man who had believed in her when she could no longer believe in herself. "I wouldn't be here without you, Griffin. You know that, don't you?" Griffin shook his head. You would have found your way eventually. Your dream was too strong to be denied forever." He smiled, taking her hand. "I'm just grateful I got to be part of the journey." "Not just part of it," Charlotte corrected, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their son playing in the gathering dusk. "The most important part." Over the years that followed, Charlotte's medical practice continued to thrive. She established a small hospital in Dodge City, trained numerous nurses, and eventually welcomed a second physician to the practice, a young woman who had been inspired by Charlotte's example to pursue medicine herself. Griffin's ranch grew into one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Kansas, with Galloway horses known throughout the West for their quality and training. James grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's affinity for horses and his mother's compassion for others. In 1885, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, who from her earliest days showed the same determination that had driven Charlotte to pursue her dreams against all odds. And in 1888, their family was completed with the birth of another son, Thomas. Through all the challenges and triumphs of their life together, Griffin and Charlotte remained each other's strongest supporters. They weathered droughts that threatened the ranch, epidemics that stretched Charlotte's medical skills to their limits, and the normal trials of raising a family on the Kansas frontier. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, their children organized a celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the county. As Charlotte looked around at the gathering at her thriving medical practice, represented by the nurses she'd trained, at the prosperous ranch that was Griffin's dream fulfilled, at their 3 healthy children, she was overwhelmed by how far they'd come from that first meeting when she'd been ready to abandon her dreams. That evening, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Charlotte and Griffin stood on the porch of their home, arms around each other as they gazed up at the star-filled Kansas sky. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been if you hadn't fallen from your horse that day?" Charlotte asked. Griffin smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way she'd always loved. "I don't believe in accidents, Charlotte. I believe we were meant to find each other." Charlotte leaned her head against his shoulder. "Because you needed a doctor. Because you needed someone to remind you of your own strength," Griffin replied. "And I needed someone to show me that life could be full of purpose and love again." "We've built a good life, haven't we?" Charlotte said softly. Griffin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Though 20 years had passed since they'd first met, the love in his eyes was unchanged. "The best life," he agreed. "A life built on dreams we refused to abandon and promises we fought to keep." Charlotte stood on tiptoe to kiss him, this man who had believed in her until she could believe in herself again. "I love you, Griffin Galloway." "And I love you, Dr. Galloway," he replied, drawing her close. Now and always. Above them, the stars of the Kansas sky bore witness to 2 dreams fulfilled not separately, but together, stronger for being shared. And in the quiet of the prairie night, Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that some dreams were worth fighting for, especially when you didn't have to fight alone.